Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to a brand new movie review. Today we're going to be giving our review on T2 Trainspotting, or Trainspotting 2, which is the 2017 British black comedy crime drama directed by Danny Boyle, written by John Hodge, starring Ewan McGregor, Ewen Bremner, Jonny Lee Miller and Robert Carlyle. This is of course the sequel to the 1996 original Trainspotting, directed by Danny Boyle again, and featuring all exactly the same cast. Also, I should say as well, we're doing this purely audio, and Tom, you are back joining us on another movie review.
Yay!
Yay! This is old school. Getting used to this setup. This was an interesting one because Trainspotting was a film that I'd seen on many lists before this, on greatest films of all time. I watched it last year, thoroughly enjoyed it. Watched it the day before seeing this one. And I didn't really know. I know this film's been in the works for quite a long time. I know that Danny Boyle originally expressed interest in doing a sequel to this around 2009. He wanted to wait till all the cast had aged. So we usually start off with these things with our thoughts on the original or the trailers based on this. So I think we should talk about the first Trainspotting a little bit first, because we haven't done a review on it before, and I think it's definitely a film worth talking about to give us a basis before going into the review for this one.
Yeah, sure. Trainspotting. The first Trainspotting was absolutely brilliant. It's dark. It's funny. It's just it's probably one of the. When did I can't remember when I first watched it, but I remember just being absolutely grossed out by everything in it. And actually, one thing I will say is about the original is that it's the drug taking isn't as intense as I remember.
In the first movie?
Yeah, in the first movie.
What I think what it does well is it's very stylistically done, and that's what I like about the first movie. But what I liked about that first movie, what it did was it didn't shy away from the dark, depraved side of drug addiction. Like, it wasn't glorified in any way. Like, as soon as they tend to glorify it in the way that the characters do, they show you the blunt reality of that situation. So I think it's more shocking in that regard, especially, I guess this is going into spoiler territory for the first Trainspotting film, but obviously the scene with the baby is one that's brought up quite often as the integral moment in that film. And the scene where Ewan McGregor's character Renton is going cold turkey and having all these crazy, nightmarish visions. And that's why I like the first movie, because it wasn't afraid to go in those territories.
Yeah, no, it does. When it needs to get serious, it gets serious. And that's when I really enjoy Danny Boyle's movies. The only one I haven't enjoyed is The Beach, because that's just not. It's not inherently Danny Boyle. He makes very short movies which are on point and get to the point quickly, and don't shy away from all this gore and all this the subject matter of the film. So, like, for example, Trainspotting deals with a lot of drug addiction and all the disgusting things that entail that brings. And he doesn't shy away from that. And it's in other movies like 127 Hours, the climactic scene where is just visceral and horrible. And Trainspotting definitely does have some sort of horror elements to it. It does remind me of what was it? When the baby's head turns around. It's kind of Exorcist.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And I mean, watching it again now, it's quite obviously a doll.
Yeah,
but it's still, you still carry with it all the, just the shock of that moment.
Yeah,
and I mean, it was a second feature as well. I mean, Shallow Grave was his first one in '94. Trainspotting followed 2 years after. It was done on like a 1.5 mil budget, which when you say like £1 million, like, that's still a lot. But in terms of a film, that was so small, and then it made 72 million at the box office. That's incredible. And I'm quite shocked, in fact, that a sequel hadn't happened before this, but I respect Danny Boyle for saying that he wanted to wait until the characters had physically aged themselves to make the sequel all that more believable.
Yeah, no, that was good on his part, because the when something's popular, or it's kind of a trend now, isn't it, that you go back and revisit old films that came out in like the 2000s or the 90s. That seems to be a recurring thing now. But no, it is good that he waited the length of time that he did, because you see them when they're in the first film and they're all thin and skinny, but now in the sequel they physically aged, and you know, the life experience they gained from that 20 years is visible on the faces of the actors.
They are all rocking the dad bod.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, definitely. And what was I going to say about the characters as well? With a film like this, a sequel made 20 years after the fact, more than 20 years after the fact, if you look at the success rate of films like that in the past, it's pretty slim, whether it's a comedy or just a sequel to a popular franchise, whatever it happens to be. It's so very difficult to capture that magic that the original had, the meaning, the substance behind the first one, and also offer something new to the table and don't lean on the first one too much as a crutch. And that was my biggest concern going into this one. Watching the trailers, it did look new, it did look fresh. There were still obviously similar elements to it. There was the scene that, I think it was the last scene of the trailer, the scene where Ewan McGregor's character gets hit by the car, he flips over the bonnet and then smiles. That's obviously in the first movie. And the big monologue speech he has in the film where he's choose life, choose whatever, and there's like a 10-minute monologue, whatever it is. You had those similar elements to it, and I was really worried that this would be, you know, like another Dumb and Dumber 2 or something like that, and this was just going to completely miss the mark. If we're going to go into initial impressions, though, the trailers definitely did have me intrigued. I was excited to see it. I was pleasantly surprised by it. Did we need a sequel to the first Trainspotting? No, I think you could just completely watch the first one on its own, but I am very glad that we got this movie, especially with all the original cast and crew behind it again, which just gave it all that more that substance for it to come back full force. And I think it's a thoroughly entertaining film. I don't think it has quite the level of meaning and substance that the first movie did, but I think it's still just a fun experience, and it's just great to see all these characters back together on the big screen.
Yeah, I'd actually say it has slightly different themes and ideas to it than the first one, and I think that's what stands it apart from just being another revisiting sequel. Because you know, when you get films like this, like I don't know, American Pie Reunion, they just hark back to all the old jokes and everything, and it just doesn't. It feels like they're trying too hard to relive their youth, and actually, that's kind of a big thing here, where they kind of embrace that fact, I think, or to a certain degree. But my initial thoughts going in were when I saw the first trailer, I was hesitant, because I thought to myself, please don't mess this up.
Yeah. Just
don't mess this up. I don't want to come out of it disappointed. And you know what? After hour and a half, or hour and 35 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, it's a 93-minute movie.
Yeah, I was thoroughly entertained. Although I will say my screening, the sound at the quality at the beginning wasn't great, especially for Begbie's, where you see what he's been up to.
Yeah, no, I was going to bring that up too. I watched it, I really... Maybe it was the accent, and I don't know, because I completely understood the first one. I mean, I understand the Scottish accent, but I don't know if it was a case of I had to adjust to their... Because they do have a very broad accent in this film. Yeah. I don't know if it was me trying to adjust to that. As soon as it got past that first scene, I was completely fine with it and followed it. But yeah, I don't know if it was the audio, or I don't know if it was just me, you know, coming back into this world of Trainspotting and then trying to pick up on the accent and go along with it, because they definitely do have a very broad accent and unique way of talking. But the plot for this one, for anyone who doesn't know, this is going to probably make sense to no one if you haven't seen the first Trainspotting, but after 20 years of estrangement, Mark Renting returns home to Edinburgh from Amsterdam and reunites with his old friends, some of whom may be leading very similar lives since last he saw them. That's kind of a synopsis that I've had to cobble together, because because everywhere I've looked on the internet, I couldn't find one that really did the plot justice, and I can't really go too heavily into the plot because this is the spoiler-free section. We'll get onto spoilers later. We'll let you guys know when we get to that part. So I think the best place to jump off into this is with the characters, and as I said, because this is spoiler-free, there's a lot we can't really talk about, but we have arguably our main character with Renton, played by Ewan McGregor. Very different take on the character, because as we said, many of the characters advance, and I do like that about it. I like sequels that can stand on their own as a movie, and I believe this one absolutely can. It was nice seeing Ewan McGregor in a movie again. It's been quite a while since I've seen him in anything, and he's such a great actor. He's brilliant in this, although I would argue this isn't his movie, and we've spoken a little bit before we hit record, and we're both in agreement that we both think that Spud, Ewen Bremner's character, is the main character of this film. Did that put you off at all? Did you want Renton as the main character? And I mean, he does have a prominent role in the film. It's not like he's not in the movie, but I would argue that the film isn't centered around him.
Yeah, I was actually pleasantly surprised that, you know, this wasn't in fact all about Renton, because that was a worry going into it as well, that it was that it was just going to be a Renton movie, much like Toy Story 2 is a Woody movie and not everyone else's.
Yeah. And I guess you could argue also that Renton's character arc, whilst he does have a character arc in this one, you could say that it was really complete by the end of the first Trainspotting movie.
Yeah. I think in terms of how it sets up its characters, it puts them in a situation where they're still holding on to the past or reliving past memories and moments from their youth that they enjoyed or they despised, and they're coming more to grips with that as they age, and it is all about, you know, aging and all this other stuff, and like the reliving of a life you led 20 years ago and revisiting it, which I think is just great storytelling.
And what all the characters share with in this, although they're in kind of very different situations when we get reintroduced to them all, they're all in a state of limbo in their lives. Ewan McGregor's character Renton, who initially left, at spoiler alert, at the end of the first film with £16,000, started a new life for himself. We learn in this one, not going too much into spoilers, that he had a wife, he's had children, and now that's kind of backfired, and he's found himself returning to the place where he grew up, and he is kind of lost. He says that there's a line in this film where he says something along the lines of, "I'd rather be caught up in all these harebrained schemes that Simon's concocting because I haven't got anything else better to do. Like, the career that I have, I'm probably going to get sacked very soon, and then I won't know what to do." So he's in a very weird state of identity. He doesn't know what to do. Simon is basically just a con man at this point, like a cocaine addict.
Oh yeah.
He's blackmailing people. He's very much sort of pretty much how he was in the first movie, I would say. He's moved from one very different kind of drug to another. Spud is just heartbreaking. He is the heart and soul of this film.
Yeah, Spud is actually, I would say, more in a state of limbo than any of the other characters, because he is the one that hasn't moved on at all from where he left off 20 years ago, because, you know, he's at the beginning of the movie, and this sort of established really early on that he's still facing his drug addiction and still trying to force himself to quit. And, you know, it's tragic that to see this character still in that state after 20 years. It was heartbreaking.
And there's a great scene in this with Spud and Renton where Renton's saying, you need something to fight for, essentially. You need to find something deep within you that is going to get you through this addiction. And it ultimately is, with Spud, is his wife and son. That's what he's trying to do everything for in this film. And that's where I really think that Spud is the main character of this film. He is the one who gets the most profound character arc out of anyone, I would say. And his scenes, you want to see him come out on top. You want to see him do well. He's a very likable character.
Yeah.
And then that brings us on to the fourth character in our group, Franco, played by the fantastic Robert Carlyle, who is easily my favourite character in this movie. If you thought he was terrifying in the first movie, oh boy, you haven't seen anything until you see this one. He is intense, he is terrifying, and he's funny. He still has that funny quality that he does in the first one. What I will say is, I guess this is jumping the gun a bit here, I'll let you talk about Franco in a minute. When this film started off, I think for the first 20 or 30 minutes or so, I was kind of not on board with this film because it felt like all of them, how the characters were written, it felt like they were all caricatures of their characters from the first movie. That, especially with Franco, I think he was the biggest culprit of that. But as the film progresses and we get a lot more involved with Franco, we get some emotional side to Franco as well, which was very welcomed, and some of my favourite scenes in the film involve that. That was kind of all through to the wayside, and I was like, okay, I can see what they're doing here, because if this had been the case where they were just playing wacky, stereotypical characterizations of how they were in the first movie, this film could have completely backfired.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there is not an actor in this movie that makes me feel more tense than Begbie, because every time he's on screen, you feel he could just snap at any point. Any point. It really just blew me away how incredibly tense it was watching him on screen. And his character, I would say, actually has become even more aggressive.
Oh, definitely.
Than where we left him in 1996, mainly because I think the years that he spent. I mean, this is all start the movie business. It's the years he spent in prison have made him that much more violent. Where he enjoyed the odd fight and beating people up with snooker cues in the first movie for opening a packet of crisps,
throwing glass,
actually,
glasses over a balcony.
But he did not. I don't think he did. He did not beat up that transvestite.
No, he didn't. He kind of just got out of there and then was like punching a wall and telling Renton to never bring it up again. Which I'll get into in spoilers, was an element I thought they were going to revisit with this film, which would have been very interesting if they had. But if I'm going to compare Robert Carlyle's performance to any other actor I can think of at this point, it will probably be Tom Hardy's performance in Bronson. How you do have that humorous quality to him, and then at any moment the fuse is just so short that he could just snap. Yeah. And you don't know what he's capable of. He could be capable of murder for all we know. And it certainly almost gets that stage in this movie as well. We do get introduced to another new character in this film as well, called Veronika Kovac, played by, I'm going to go for it here, Angela Nedyalkova, who has no credits from what I can see. And she's only been in this movie. You have more criticism to a character, I think, than I do. I thought she was a very welcomed addition. I do think that we did need another character in the bunch, which keeps the dynamic fresh, and we get to see new characteristics to everyone. She plays... she's not like a stripper or something. She's like an escort almost. Yeah. Who is with Sick Boy's character, and she kind of works with him on all his schemes that he comes up with. I liked her character. Now, I know you have some criticisms about it.
I mean, I did like her character, and I liked her performance in the role. My only concern is that I don't think she was developed all that much. She was given hints of some development with things going on in her life, but it wasn't central to her character. She just appeared to be there to get involved in schemes and things. And it's hard to introduce a character so much when you've got four other characters you know really well, and they're the centerpiece of the film. And I assume it was hard to sort of bring in a new character to fill in the gap for people, but I don't know. I just didn't think she was overly as well. Actually, I don't think she was as developed as I wanted her to be, or as developed as the other characters were, because that was my main focus. Main focus wasn't on her; it was on Renton, Simon, Francis, and Spud.
Yeah,
and yeah, that's really my. It's more a personal thing that I didn't find her that character really that developed at all. It's
I do think they could have gone more in depth into it, but as you said, this is a film that also has to... Well, it's the reintroduction of all these characters after 20 years, so we've got to catch up with them, see what they're doing, establish their roles in the film and what they're trying to achieve, and then she's also in the mix in the background too. Yeah. So I think we just get enough, but I can understand what you're saying. I do think that if she hasn't done any acting before, I thought she played it brilliantly.
Oh no, she did.
I'd love to see more of her. That's not a euphemism, although I guess that carries. But right, moving swiftly on. Anyway, so the directing, Frankie, but we've kind of touched on this. Or I said Frankie Boyle then. Wow, can you imagine his take on this movie? He directed it.
Oh,
wow, Danny Boyle. We've kind of already touched on this already, but he is a great filmmaker, The Beecher Side.
Yeah.
And he still brings that style and quirkiness that the first movie had into this one too. There's some, in terms of like lighting and everything, there's one of my favourite shots in the film is where they're driving in a car and the car kind of illuminates with, I think it's George Best, isn't it, on the side of the car.
George Best on the side. But Danny Boyle is probably, arguably, I would say, one of the best British filmmakers ever.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And I mean, he's up against the likes of Chris Nolan and people like that. But I think he does bring an edge to his movies, and that they are distinctly Danny Boyle. There's something about them that you can just pinpoint that is a Danny Boyle film. I don't know if that's the sort of runtime or how he constructs his movies and how they flow from one scene to another and how he ultimately edits them. But he is a very talented filmmaker, and all of his films have some sort of quirk or some sort of comedic element to them, but they're more black comedies than anything. Especially with I was say 127 Hours comes to mind. You see the main character, Aaron Ralston, decay, but it's also a very light-hearted and funny movie, especially at the beginning. And it's very much the same as that. He can construct really good comedic moments in an ultimately serious film. Yeah. And the tone of it is just staggering. And I would actually say that whereas the first one was more horror, had horror elements to it, I would say this one's more sci-fi, post-apocalyptic.
I'd say this is more a revenge thriller, especially towards the end. Thriller.
Okay. The reason I say it's kind of post-apocalyptic is because you see the decay of Scotland, or the places in which these characters live, especially the pub.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a very decayed and especially the neon and the lights. It just feels very sci-fi to me, and I don't know why, but yeah.
And I don't want to go into spoilers, but there's a line that Franco gives towards the end of this film which kind of sums that up. He says something like, "The world's changing, but we don't." I'm paraphrasing, but he says something to that fashion, and that kind of beautifully sums up the movie and the state that all the characters are going through at that stage. And also in terms of the editing, it's a very different editing style to the first movie. And actually, one of my problems for the big part of the editing in this film is that there's a lot of freeze frames in there, which I'm trying to think. I'm sure the first one had here and there, but it felt like they were going very overboard on the amount of those. It usually happened in the action scenes where it'd freeze frame on someone's animated expression, for example, or an action. I don't know if you picked up on that as well, but I did think they went a little bit overkill on those.
Oh no, going back to something about the direction as well. Danny Boyle did some fantastic work in this movie with projection, and how he projected memories onto these actual characters and onto walls and things. It was very, very brilliantly done. But yeah, the editing I think actually was quite fast paced for a sort of more fast paced world. I would say. Yeah. But I do realise your concerns about your criticism.
That's really me nitpicking with the editing, just noticing those freeze frames, because I do think on the whole, other than that, I thought the editing was fantastic, and it was its own thing, but I could see them trying to capture that style from the first movie, which I think they achieved very well. The music too, I mean, the first film has a fantastic soundtrack, and I can't remember the name of the song. It's this sort of synth intro that plays throughout. It's probably the main song, really, other than Iggy Pop's song, of the Trainspotting series, and it was used in the trailer for Trainspotting 2 as well. I love that song. That plays throughout this, and just the songs they pick in general, they really do elevate the movie. It does give it that impact, and it matches that tone very, very well. There's a great scene in this film involving, I know you don't like the song, Tom, but Radio Gaga by Queen. It's one of my favourite Queen songs. I love that song to death, so hearing that played full blast in a nightclub with everyone singing was a great moment.
I said it was the worst Queen song, or one of the worst Queen songs there ever made. I didn't say I don't like it.
Okay. I
do, and it's catchy, but it is definitely not their best. But no, it's probably one of the soundtracks I'll end up buying, because it's so good. I mean, you've got Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Blondie in there, Queen, like you said, Iggy Pop as well. It's just The Clash.
Yeah.
Oh, so many good artists and bands and things.
What you said with Iggy Pop as well, this is sort of going back to a point I made earlier. There are quite a lot of callbacks to the first movie, but I've spoken about this before with sequels, where they love nothing more than to remind us that the first film existed, and they just keep hitting us over the head with references. The biggest one I go to is in the last Hobbit movie, Battle of the Five Armies, with there is a ranger from the north, you should meet him.
Yeah.
His father, Arathorn, was a great man. His true name you should discover for yourself. Fellowship theme plays in the background. That is the worst offender of that I think I've ever seen, but obvious shoehorned in callbacks to previous entries in the series really just rubbed me up the wrong way. But it felt like these were earned, because these characters are wrestling with their past, and there's even new shots that are thrown in too of the characters when they were children, when they were growing up together, and when they were at school, which I thought were really nicely used and effectively used, especially towards a moment that happens towards the end of this film.
Yeah.
There was also... It was great how they did this. It was almost like they were watching ghosts of their previous selves. There's a scene where they're watching actions from the first movie happen in real time, and I can only guess it was, body doubles or whatever they had to do, but it was utilised so well, and it just completely blurred the lines between the first movie and this one. There was even a scene I saw with Simon and Renton, which I don't even remember seeing in the first movie, but it was how they appeared 20 years ago when the first movie was made, so I don't know if that was a deleted scene, unused footage, whatever that happened to be, but I love how Danny Boyle utilised that as well in the film. I thought that was really effective.
Oh yeah, it's been a couple of days since I've seen it, and it's still so poignant, and it still sits with me an awful lot. And all this stuff about with them. God, I don't even know where I'm going with this. I really don't.
Shall we just go into overall opinions now, and then we can go into spoilers after that? So, Tom, overall opinions on T2 Trainspotting?
I think I actually posted up a Facebook review of it. So, fantastic. Was not disappointed, and that is that.
Beautifully summed up.
Yeah.
I will agree with that. I think if you are a fan of the first one, I think you'll enjoy this one just as much. I think the first one is definitely a better movie compared to this. There are a few problems that I do have with this, but on the whole, it's a thoroughly entertaining movie, beautifully directed. It's just great seeing these characters back on screen together again. I compared it to the British comedy film The Inbetweeners with The Inbetweeners 2, how this is a much better movie in my opinion than Inbetweeners 2, but with that movie it was nice seeing those characters that we grew to love up until this point all back together on the big screen. That's exactly what I had with this. Standout performances in it from the likes of Robert Carlyle, who's without doubt my favourite character in this movie. And it also does hit on different themes, as you said, other than the first movie, and it makes it its own. It's its own standalone film, but it does have those connective tissue and through flows to the first one, which makes it just a really resounding, I would say, nice conclusion. I don't think they're going to do any more of these. No. I don't think there's really room to tell any more. I think this is the last one that we need.
They can't really do a prequel, can they?
No. Well, as we should have opened with this, but obviously these are based on a series of books, and the third book, which came out in 2012, I believe, is called Skag Boys, and that is a prequel, so it's unlikely we'll ever get that. And if we do, I don't want them to, because all these actors are these characters, and I don't want to see anyone else playing these characters.
Yeah.
So that'll do it for our spoiler-free review on T2 Trainspotting. We're going to get into spoilers now, just going through some of the main story beats in the film, some of the thematic senses that we wanted to talk about, starting with Spud trying to commit suicide.
Yeah.
I was very worried in this film when it started off that it wasn't going to hit those emotional and just really shocking highs that the first one did. And then we have Spud writing a suicide note after, not being able to find a job, after his wife has left him, taking the kid. He's a heroin addict. He's got nothing to live for. And he ties like a plastic bag around his mouth and tries to kill himself, which is then offset with some very gross out humour. But that's what we were talking about earlier. What Danny Boyle does so well is that he can take these really shocking scenes and add that levity to it as well.
Yeah. The scene. I was in the same camp as you. Whilst I was enjoying it, first of all, it didn't feel like it was hitting the same notes in terms of tone as the first film. And when this scene hit, it was like, okay, we're fine.
Yeah.
We're perfectly fine. This is how it's meant to be. It was absolutely disgusting. It was horrible.
It's just it was like he had a goldfish bowl over his head, just explosively vomited into this bag. And then it all gets over Ewan McGregor's character, and it's
he
disgusting.
has a line in it where he says, you something along the lines of, "You ruined my life, now you're ruining my death."
It reminded me of, I don't know if you can remember it from the Pixar film, The Incredibles. There's a scene where a guy tries to commit suicide by jumping off a building. Mr. Incredible saves him, and he says, "You ruined my death." It really reminded me of that. But no, I'm completely on the same page as you. I was concerned that it wasn't going to hit those elements of the story, but I'm very glad that it did, and I think it was absolutely necessary. Then we move to the more comedic with Begbie's escape from prison, which I don't know if it's in tone of the other Trainspotting film, because it did feel very much like this was all out comedy in this scene. Some contrivances here and there as to how he got out, but we needed to get Begbie out somehow, and it was just very funny to watch him, because as Robert Carlyle plays the comedy brilliantly, and he plays the intense stuff phenomenally. So it was nice to have this little bit of levity here with Begbie, where he will do anything to get out of prison.
Oh yeah.
Even if it requires getting a knitting needle stabbed through his liver.
Oh, you've done enough damage already. And at that point I thought, when he takes the needle out from under his bed in prison, and the guy stabs him, I thought, all right, he's going to go on a bit of a murder spree.
Yeah.
But no, he was actually surprisingly fine with being stabbed in the liver.
And I mean, there were some bits like he knocks out a doctor in broad daylight in the middle of a hospital corridor,
Yeah.
which I can only assume would be an incredibly busy hospital in Edinburgh.
Yeah. Well, it's 2016 Britain. Hospitals are going downhill.
Maybe we all need Begbie as a doctor. Actually, no, that's probably the single most terrifying thing I can think of.
Solution to everything would either be glass you, or beat you up with a snooker cue, or stab you through the liver with a knitting needle.
Or the bit where he pulls out that cord that's like inside him as well in the hospital. It was horrible. There was definitely still some gross out moments in this film. So we have Renton coming back to Edinburgh. There's a nice moment where he meets up with his dad, who, God, how could I forget the actor's name? James Cosmo, who's a fantastic actor. It was great to see him back. It was nice having that moment where they could reunite too, and one of the final shots of this movie is them together where he just hugs him, and it was a really nice moment, I thought.
Yeah.
Sort of brought that whole character arc with those two to a close. And Renton comes back, he approaches Simon, and he says that he's got a wife, he's got kids, he's doing well, which proceeds to Simon trying to beat Renton to death with a snooker cue in a cocaine-fueled rage that's lasted 20 years. It was a great scene, and this was one of the scenes that was shown in the trailer. As soon as we saw him with a snooker cue in the trailer, and it's got that tone in his voice when he says, "So what have you been up to for 20 years?" And then we see later on in the trailer when he's trying to hit him, I knew it was going to be the same scene. It was a completely believable moment in that once we know ultimately that, you know, Renton stole £16,000 from them, and Simon or Bigby never got a cut of it. It was a great moment. I love Simon in this film too. He's really funny, even with his... He's a lot more scarier in this movie than he is in the first one, but I guess that's just down to the cocaine.
It's just the white hair as well.
It's which we see him dying in one scene, which was just brilliant. It was a believable scene, and then it's all the more heartbreaking later on once we learned that Renton was lying, and he was doing it to sort of cover himself and trying to mask the sense that he is essentially just the same as the other three.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. The scene started off on a tense note, I think, and then veered more towards the comedy side. I mean, it was very funny to watch, even though it was quite violent.
Yeah.
And they do get beaten up, or Renton gets beaten up more than Sick Boy or Simon. But it was I would say initially it was played as a tense moment, but that's Danny Boyle. He'll switch things, and he'll turn things on their heads where something you think is going to be tense turns out to be played for laughs. And I think that's really good. The scene was great, and the guy at the bar just watching everything while drinking a pint was fantastic as well. And
I liked, moving on from that, I'm sort of jumping ahead now, but I did like Simon and Renton's relationship all the way throughout this film as well.
Yeah.
Because you never really knew where they stood with each other. One moment they're trying to, you know, Simon's trying to rat out Renton and get Franco to murder him, and then in other scenes he's going back against it because he likes Renton now and they're friends again. He wants to keep him safe. So there was that balancing act between the two of them, which I thought was great, where they're all trying to like play the other, because ultimately Renton is sleeping with Simon's girlfriend, in inverted commas. What's the line he says in this film? He says that certain intercourse has taken place which justifies that they're girlfriend and boyfriend. I can't remember what he says. It's a great line in the film. We get other returning cast members too. We get a very brief cameo in the film with Diane, who was the schoolgirl that Ewan McGregor was with in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
She's now became a lawyer. She's done very well for herself, and there's a nice little... There's a knowing moment between the two of them where she says, "Hey, Renton, she's too young for you," or something like that. I did expect her to be in the film a lot more, especially when I saw her in the trailer, but I'm very happy that she was in one scene. We don't need every single character to come back like a Brady Bunch reunion special.
Yeah.
Like, it was nice to... They get their moment, we remember it from the first one, and then, you know, boom, we move on to the next scene. So
oh yeah, definitely. She was in it just enough. You knew what she was getting up to, and there was that there was that comedy there, but you know, she's not important to the story. She was fleeting in the first one. in her relationship with Renton, and it's fleeting here, which kind of is nice.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the first one, she's still writing to him, but that was just a relationship that legally could not happen.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see that they do still have that respect for each other, and she even asks him, like, are you still on heroin? And he says no, and she's like, good. So she's happy that he's made a life for himself and that he's moved away from that, even though later on in the film he does take another hit of heroin, which we'll get onto later, I'm sure. One of my favourite scenes, one of the funniest scenes in this film, which at first I had no idea where this was going. It's the scene where Renton and Simon go to the Protestant rally.
Oh, yes.
They're going there to steal credit cards and to take all the money out of the hole in the wall in the cash machine. And they get caught up in this huge Protestant rally where they're just singing and raging against Catholics, the Catholic regime. And they get thrown up. As they're about to leave with the credit cards, they get forced to sing a song on stage, and they have to kind of improvise one on the spot. It was hilarious. It was hilarious to see Simon try and play the piano. They're singing horribly out of time, and then by the end of the scene, they've got everyone on their feet dancing and singing to "There'll Be No More Catholics Left." It's brilliant. It was genius. It was absolute genius.
That really was fantastic. Initially you thought, oh, when the bouncer stops them, you thought, oh, great, the plan's gonna end, and they're gonna get beaten up and thrown out on the street, because that seems to be what happens now. Is now they're older, they get beaten up an awful lot. But
if we're not back in an hour, what should I tell them? Tell them we're dead.
Tell them we're dead. Oh, it was brilliant, and it brought more levity to it, and gave us a break from Begbie's rage, and I think that's what I liked about it. It was definitely one of the best scenes in the film, and one of the best comedic scenes in the film, if not the best. It was fantastically directed and just fantastically performed, and watching them try and process how they're actually going to get out of this one. It's like a Scooby-Doo moment.
It is, yeah. No, I completely get that. Absolutely. So we move on. So Franco and Renton have their first fight, which is the dawning realization on both of their faces in this, and we talked a little bit about this before we hit record. There's a scene where they're in a nightclub, and Sick Boy has ratted out Renton to Franco and says that he'll be at this nightclub at this particular time. Renton goes to the bathroom, he's in there. Bigby comes in, he's trying to take some Viagra because he can't get it up. He's in the stall next to him, unbeknownst to each other. They get into an argument, obviously their voices, they recognise each other, and then it's the expression on both of their faces at the same time is beautiful. And I can only imagine they built the set so that both of the actors were in opposite ones to each other, because it almost looks like a split screen how it's recorded on the film. It's the scene you see in the trailer where Franco just leans over the top of the toilet stall and just shouts at him and then just charges at him out the door, which then leads to a huge chase across Edinburgh, which I was not expecting, which is fantastic, which leads them to a multi-storey car park where Frankie Goes to Hollywood 2 Tribe starts to play. It was tense, it was hilarious, it was everything I wanted that scene to be and more, and really kind of establishes the tone for what we get for the rest of this movie, in terms of it being, this is where I said it's more like a revenge thriller, with Francis just vows revenge on Renton, and he's like the Terminator. He can't be bought, he can't be reasoned with, and he will absolutely not stop until he is dead. Yeah,
that's the comparison I was going to make just before you said it. Is that this reminds me of the Terminator 2, or the Relentless Pursuit. Or being a relentless pursuer, not giving up, not stopping, not eating, not sleeping, and the moment where he jumps on the car with the 2 Tribes playing, or I think it was 2 Tribes, or was it?
No, it was Relax.
Relax, yeah, it was Relax. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Relax, yeah. Was very Terminator-esque, I would say, but the probably my favourite bit of the entire film, or the bit I'll remember the most is where they're in the cubicles next to each other, and just they have a bit of banter, or well, really Begbie kind of does a bit of threatening, but and just the look they get, everybody everybody laughed at the screening I went to. Everybody, it was fantastic. That's the bit that I think will, in terms of it being the funniest bit, that's it.
I was going to say that's really the pinnacle moment that you're waiting for as an audience member. You're waiting for these characters to come into contact with each other again. He's met up with everyone else up until this point, and the big finale is when he comes to a head with Franco, and he absolutely does in glorious fashion. Before we get on to the very end of this film, though, I do want to kind of hit on a few of the themes of this film. And it's really sort of like fathers and sons. There's definitely a theme running through the film of that, because not only do you have Renton and his father at the end, which is kind of the final emotional bracket at the end of this film, but you have they're ultimately all fathers in some way, or have been fathers. You've got Renton, who was married to a Dutch girl, I believe he said. He had a boy and a girl, and they're getting a divorce, and he probably won't see them all that much now. He's moved back to Edinburgh. He's probably going to try and make a new life for himself there. You've got Franco, who gets one of the most emotionally hard-hitting moments. He has a very, very strained relationship with his son. He tries to get him into his line of work by, burgling and fighting and all that stuff. His son's going in for hotel management, and he's going to lead a very, very different life to his dad. And there's a nice moment at the end where the two of them shake hands. We also get a flashback where we see a vision of Franco and his father, who was a drunken sort of duster on the street, basically. And it's tragic to see that history had to repeat itself in that way with Franco, because you think of the different character that he could have been.
Yeah.
You also have Simon from the first movie, who lost that. Was it a baby girl?
Yeah, it was I think it was a baby boy,
but yeah. And he's clearly still reeling from that. He gets that heartbreaking moment in the first movie, and we get a flashback to that as well in this film.
I'd just like to say that the bit where they're going to Tommy's grave on the hill, on the exact same hill that Tommy tried to walk them out on in the first film, and Renton absolutely lays into Simon about his dead kid. Yeah, it was just thought he was going to absolutely tear him up.
Yeah, but it's almost like he agrees with him, and it's this awkward state of stability between the two, and both of them said what they needed to say. And I think it did need to, and I think that Simon needed to be reminded of that as well. Clearly he's never forgotten it, but maybe with the drugs have helped him suppress that memory, and it was almost like it needed to be said, and it was a long time coming, and he needed that recollection of that moment. Then obviously with Spud as well, with fatherhood, I mean, that's probably the biggest theme in this film with him, is that he's ultimately doing everything for his son. So I like that there's that theme running through the film, and it really does tie all the characters together, I think, in some way.
I know I was kind of, actually this was something I was hesitant about, is during it, was, are they actually going to make Begbie the out and out? I know he's sort of the quote villain of the piece, but are they gonna make him the sort of comedic relief with the bit of villainy to him? And I really liked the fact that he had his moment with his son at towards the end of the film, where he says, I'm gonna have to do something that means I won't be able to see you for a very long time, but I hope you lead a better life than I did. It was really powerful. It was a really powerful scene, and I'm glad they gave him that moment of reconciliation, that moment of he has been a father that hasn't been there. He's like you said, history had to repeat itself, but in that moment he has a moment of realization that he wasn't the best dad, and now's his chance to kind of make one tiny amendment to that. And I think it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm glad we did get a moment like that, because if we hadn't had, he would have been a very stereotypical comedic bad guy, as you said. But I like how every single character in this does get at least one moment where we do get that emotion with them, which is what really helps this film stand on its own too. I mean, we talk about like really bad sequels where they just try and capture the magic. This was advancing the characters with events that we were already aware of from the first movie, and in relation to Franco with elements that we didn't know and that were new to this one. So I liked that about it, and that ultimately brings us to the finale with Renton versus Franco, round 2. I was genuinely on the edge of my seat in this moment, because I mean, I haven't read the book. I don't know how similar this movie is to the book. I genuinely didn't know if all 4 of these characters were going to make it through to the end.
No, because I mean, it all comes to a head when Franco goes to Spud, actually.
Oh god, that bit.
And you think
so tense.
he's going to kill him. After reading the things, and they're going back through the memories of how they were, and then the bit comes where the moment comes where he has to read the night that Renton left. He has to read that.
When he finds out that he's been left 4,000.
He's gonna get, when he says stay right there.
Yeah.
He's gonna come back and kill him, and then Veronica reads these stories that Spud has written, which actually I quite like, because he eventually, I think he overcomes his addiction to a certain degree. He gets addicted to something else, and this is like Renton said in earlier on in the movie, you need to get addicted to something else. And this is his moment of, he's becoming addicted to something else, which is writing. Yeah. And Veronica reads all this and comes in and just, you think, and then Begbie comes back, and it's all going to come to a head. But I liked that they managed to get out of it.
Yeah, and the ending almost reminded me, there's elements of Blade Runner in there.
Yes, there is. There definitely is. I was definitely thinking that while watching it. The pursuit through the pub is very, very Roy Batty and Rick Deckard.
Yeah, breaking through the ceiling and onto the roof,
and smashing head, or not necessarily smashing head, but putting his head through the glass room.
Yeah,
it really. We
just needed a wolf howl. We do get one earlier in the film between Simon and Franco, but it would have been great if we'd have had a moment like that here. Maybe 2 on the nose.
Yeah.
I'm glad you picked up on that too, because I noticed that when I was watching it. And then we get the scene with Renton where he kind of slips through the roof, and then he's hanging. He has that wire around his neck, and all seems like. And then Franco is like pulling him down, trying to break his neck, and because before that Simon had been knocked out, I didn't expect that they'd rush to his aid, and you could argue that that's a little bit contrived at the end of this film, like, suddenly he wakes up and he helps get them down, but I think it's necessary that all 4 have to be present in that ending scene together.
One thing I will say before I talk about that particular point was where Franco and Renton are talking to each other through the glass wall.
Yeah.
And they're reminiscing about the first time they met. Is Renton first day at school, and Franco had been kept behind a couple of years, and they met each other for the first time there, and the relationship is, and the rest is history. But that was a very nice bit, and ultimately, it's nice to see these characters reminisce, but ultimately the end game for Franco was to kill Renton. And as soon as he slipped off the roof and started to hang, I thought, this is it. He's dead. He's dead. But I actually think there was a moment in there in which Franco walks up to him, sees him hanging, that I thought there might have been a little something to say that maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah.
Maybe I should, but ultimately he does. Try to, at least.
And I think Carlyle did bring that into his performance, because I thought the same. There is that look of regret and sort of like hopefulness on his face, and then he comes back and then tries to kill him. Even in the moment where he's trying to kill him, it looks like his heart isn't completely in it. But as I say, Carlyle's fantastic in this, and then ultimately gets knocked out with a cistern from a toilet, gets thrown back in jail, and then we have our ending where what I like about everything gets tied up where they come into a deal where they're getting £100,000. Spud leaves it to Veronica, and she says that she's going to send some over, and then Spud's going to give it to his wife and son, and he leaves all his stories to his son. His wife says, I know a name for it, obviously probably hinting that it's going to be called Trainspotting. That's what I took away from it. And our final scene is with Renton, where he goes back home, hugs his dad, goes to his old room that's been kept exactly the same way it was from the first movie, and he throws on the vinyl record of Iggy Pop and starts dancing in his room, which was probably the best ending scene they could end it on.
And you see him reenacting the same movements, and it was almost like a choreograph. It was he was dancing, and it was great to just see the sort of split, because I think they do split it of him in his room and the same movements that they're doing in the future. And it was great, and especially where they sort of hark back to the moment where the room is elongated in the first one, and it's now become even more elongated as the credits roll, and it's great.
It's almost like a train tunnel, isn't it? And like the sound effects using it was fantastic how they did that. And what I like about it too is that although it does sort of come to like, you know, a nice ending where everything's sort of getting tied up, there are still some elements that aren't tied up. For example, we don't know what's going to happen to Simon now. We don't know what's going to happen to Renton. It's still kind of left up in the air, but I like it in that sense. There was a film that came out recently, Manchester by the Sea, which I criticised that I think it should have benefited with a more tightly, you know, a tight ending where everything is wrapped up and we know where the characters are going. But with this one, I liked that it ended where we ultimately don't know. They don't know.
No.
They don't. In that one moment, they're okay with it and they're happy with where they are. And I thought that was the best ending that we could have got for these characters.
Because I think ultimately that's life, really, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
And you don't know where you're going. You don't know how you're going to get there. And you can reminisce all you want and relive the past, but you know, you've got to focus on what you want and where you want to go. And I think that's just the nature of life, and I'm glad it ended on such a poignant note.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it hit the credits, I was like, okay, you know, Danny Boyle's done us proud. He's brought us a great sequel. As I say, I don't think that Trainspotting needed a sequel, but after watching this, I'm glad that this is the sequel that we got, and it was done with as much care and love and passion for these characters that the first one was too. Yeah,
because the even everybody from the original cast, if we can't do it right, we're not going to do it at all. Was the sort of feeling I got from things. I know that Danny Boyle was hesitant to do it unless the script was good or he waited, and everybody else was kind of, they also didn't want to mess it up.
Yeah.
And they didn't. They really didn't.
And with sequels like this, especially done however many years after the fact, 20 years, when we get sequels that come out 30 years after the fact, this should be used as a blueprint of how to do it. Because I didn't have a problem with this movie at all, and I think that a lot of films need to take a leaf out of this film's book in terms of how it addresses returning to a franchise such as this. So I've pretty much said everything I can on T2 Trainspotting. If you have, we'll round off on it.
Yeah, sure. I'll just give a quick roundup of what I thought. I thought it was a fantastic sequel, harken back to elements from the first movie and revisited memories. Actually, it revisited our memory of them as well.
Yeah.
So you're revisiting them like the characters are, which I think was really, really good. But no, Danny Boyle has pulled it out of the bag again, because I mean the man, I don't think has made a bad film apart from the Beach. I like all of the work I've seen from him, and that includes Sunshine, which wasn't his most critically acclaimed film, or his most well received film, but I just love Danny Boyle as a filmmaker. He's brilliant at what he does.
And I'm looking forward to seeing what he's going to make after this one now. Now, he's gone back and made a sequel to one of his old films. He's probably going to do an original content again, because he's great for original content.
127 hours too. He cuts the other arm.
He's got to chop off the other arm. Oh, that would be brilliant. But I'll completely agree with everything you said. If you have seen the first one and you did like that, chances are you'll probably love this one. If you haven't seen the first one, you go into this one, I would be very hesitant. I think that you do need to watch that first one for an initial basis on these characters.
Yeah.
But definitely give it a shot. It's a great comedy, it's a great drama piece, and it does have some great action in there as well. So that'll do it for our review on T2 Trainspotting. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of this movie. Did you like it? Didn't you like it? Let us know what you thought of the first movie too. Anything you like, please do get commenting. In terms of what's coming up on the channel, there'll be a lot more movie reviews as we move closer to Academy Awards season. There'll be reviews for Hacksaw Ridge, Jackie, Live by Night, Silence. There's a whole lot I need to backdate and get done. There's a whole lot more movie reviews we need to see. Do get in your Academy Award predictions as well, because the winner of those will get the chance to feature on one of our future Battle of the Brackets episodes. There'll be trailer reviews for me as well, trailer reactions. So get hitting that subscribe button. It's the best way to keep updated with all of our content. And until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.